Have you been circling this decision for months, maybe even years? You've thought it through from every angle. You've listed the pros and cons. You've asked friends for advice. Maybe you even hired a coach, and yet you still feel stuck. Not because you don't know what you want, and not because you don't have any options. You're stuck because you're a responsible person and you've worked way too hard to throw away the title, a paycheck, or a reputation that you spent years building. And so you wait. You wait for that missing piece of information that will finally make the risk feel safe. But here's the problem. You will never have perfect information. And if you keep waiting for certainty, you'll stay exactly where you are, not moving, not deciding, rocking back and forth on the diving board, waiting for a sign that will never come. So what do you do when you're stuck? Not for lack of intelligence, but because you're too wise to leap blindly. That's what I want to walk you through today. 5 practical shifts rooted in research and grounded in real life to help you make a decision even when failure feels really risky. 1, stop trying to make the perfect decision. If you're waiting for the perfect choice, you'll be waiting forever. That's not because you're indecisive, it's because you're smart. You've been trained to minimize risk, optimize outcomes, and solve for the best possible result. It's how you built your career. But here's the truth. In transitions like this, there is no perfect decision. Every option comes with unknowns. Every option has trade-offs. The more you chase perfection, the more stuck you become. Psychologists call this maximizing. You maximizers, you are people who strive for the absolute best outcome. And when you do that, you tend to feel more regret and less satisfaction, even when you make good choices. Why? Because you can always imagine a better scenario, and that's what you're probably doing right now. You're running scenarios in your head, turning them over and over, hoping the perfect answer will reveal itself. Hey, it won't. And the longer you wait, the heavier the decision becomes. And I can hear the pushback. Okay, Julie, these aren't small moves. This isn't about picking the right hotel for vacation. This is my livelihood, my family, my identity. Of course, I should hold out for the best. And you're right. The stakes are very high. But that's exactly why perfection is a trap, because you'll never have enough information to guarantee the best outcome. Even the most thorough due diligence won't tell you how it will feel to sit across from that new boss, or whether the culture that looks great in interviews will still feel healthy after a year. So what do you do instead? You redefine the target. You stop asking, what's the perfect choice? And you start asking, what's the best available move given what I know today? That reframing honors your responsibility. You're still being thoughtful, still weighing the stakes, but it frees you from chasing certainty that doesn't exist. Because the real danger isn't making the wrong move. The real danger is waiting for perfect until the window closes. You don't get points for holding out longer. You only get movement by making the best call you can today and trusting yourself to adjust after. 2, test the recovery, not just the decision. If you can't guarantee perfection, what do you solve for instead? Recovery. Most people stuck at the edge of a big choice are asking the wrong question. They're asking, what if this fails? A better question is, if this fails, how will I recover? Behavioral economics explains why this matters. Research on loss aversion showed that losses feel twice as painful as equivalent gains feel good. That means your brain is wired to inflate the cost of failure, which is why your mind immediately jumps to catastrophe. If this goes badly, I'll never be relevant again. I'll lose everything I worked for. That wiring keeps you circling. But if you test your recovery, you shrink the fear into something actionable. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Julie, I've seen people actually fail and not seem to recover. I've seen people who've walked away from being a partner or leave the law practice or jump to a new company and then flop. What if that's me? Look, those examples are real, but they may also be exceptions. More often, what looks like failure from the outside is actually redirection. People consult, they take interim roles, they use their networks. They may not always get back the exact seat they left, but they create a new one, and that's recovery. So testing recovery means asking concrete questions. Like, if the new role is a disaster, what would I do next? If the startup flops, what's my bridge plan? Do I have the runway to pause for 6 months? Could I step into advisory work while I regroup? None of these questions makes the leap risk-free, but they turn risk into something you can plan for. And planning is what gives you the confidence to move. Because here's the hard truth. Waiting doesn't remove risk either. It just trades the visible risk of action for the hidden risk of staying put. Regret, missed opportunities, and energy drained by that inertia. If you want a way forward that honors your sense of responsibility, stop testing for perfect and start testing your ability to recover. That doesn't mean you'll never stumble. It means you know in advance how you'll get back up. And that knowledge is often enough to break the paralysis. 3, shrink the horizon. One of the deepest fears you may be carrying is a fear of regret. You can do all the homework, talk to the people inside, scan Glassdoor reviews, research the culture, and still land under a terrible boss or a restructure or a weak team or a company that looks shiny on the outside but is a mess on the inside. And that's the nightmare, not just failing, but failing in a way that you feel like you can't undo. You can't go back. You can't recover the years, and so you freeze. Look, that fear is real, and the truth is there are too many unknowns to completely eliminate it. No spreadsheet or coffee chat or interview questions can guarantee that the job you step into won't disappoint you. Even the best opportunities come with hidden variables. Psychologists call this the illusion of control, our tendency to believe that if we just collect enough information, we can manage every outcome. But the data says otherwise. We adapt to surprises, good and bad, far more than we expect. Research shows that regret fades faster than we imagine because our brains are wired to make meaning out of setbacks. Now, I hear the objection. Julie, this isn't just about disappointment that I can shrug off. This is my livelihood. I've worked years, maybe decades, to get here. I can't risk throwing it away. And you're right. This isn't trivial. Shrinking the horizon doesn't minimize the weight of the choice. It actually acknowledges the weight while still giving you a way to act in the face of it. Instead of asking, what if I regret this forever? Ask, what would I need in the next 90 days to know if this was the right move? Maybe it's setting clear benchmarks for what good looks like. Support from your manager, runway to make an impact, clarity in your role. Maybe it's committing in advance to a timeline. So you tell yourself, if I see these red flags by month 3, here's how I'll respond. Maybe it's keeping 1 or 2 warm paths open, so if regret does show up, you have a way to pivot. When you shrink the horizon, you're not pretending regret will definitely not happen. You're actually making space for it and then giving yourself the tools to respond to it if it does, because regret is not the end of your story. It's simply feedback. It's information. And when you plan for how you'll use that information, well, guess what happens? The fear of regret stops being a wall and becomes a hurdle that you know that you can clear. The reality is you can't guarantee that a new company, boss, or team will be better. But you can guarantee this. Standing frozen on the edge guarantees nothing will change. Shrinking the horizon means accepting regret as a possibility and preparing yourself to move through it instead of letting the fear of it keep you from moving at all. 4, name the downside and then cut it in half. Fear grows in the dark. When you let the what ifs swirl around in your head, they always expand into catastrophe. If this fails, it will wreck everything. If I leave, I'll never get back in. If this new role is a mistake, I'll be stuck forever. That vagueness is what's keeping you frozen. But here's what we know from psychology. When you actually write down the worst case scenario, the intensity shrinks. Cognitive behavioral research shows that externalizing your fears forces your brain to shift from raw emotion into evaluation. And when you evaluate concretely, what felt like catastrophe usually looks smaller, more specific, and more survivable. Now, I hear the objection. Julie, I've seen careers implode. I've watched people leave secure roles and never regain the same level. It happens. And you're right, it does. These are cautionary tales. But the truth is, most seasoned professionals don't implode. They pivot, they consult, they find an interim role, they leverage their networks to re enter in a different lane. And the outcome isn't ruin, it's redirection. Now, that doesn't make the fear disappear, but it makes it accurate instead of inflated. So here's where the second step comes in, because once you've named the downside, cut it in half. If you think the worst case is 6 months without income, maybe it's really 3. If you're picturing complete reputational collapse, maybe it's actually 1 or 2 skeptical colleagues or 1 missed opportunity. Research on effective forecasting shows that our brains consistently overestimate both the size and the duration of pain. Reality is almost always smaller than the monster in your imagination. When you name and then half the downside, you're not sugarcoating the risk, you're putting it into proportion. You're turning it from something catastrophic and undefined into something specific and tolerable. And tolerable doesn't mean pleasant, it means survivable. It means something that you can move through if unfortunately it does happen. Because the truth is, staying stuck doesn't eliminate risk either. It just trades the visible risk of action for the hidden risk of regret. Naming the downside and then cutting it in half, this is how you start to strip fear of its exaggeration and see the decision for what it is. Hard, yes, but not impossible. And then 5, this is so important. Remember that your agency continues after the decision. One of the biggest myths about big career moves is that once you leap, your agency ends. As if you're locked in, powerless, and all you can do is hope that it works. That's not how real life unfolds. Agency doesn't end when you decide, it continues. You don't suddenly lose the ability to think, adapt, and respond just because you changed lanes. Think about your own history. You've worked for difficult bosses. You've been handed impossible projects. You've had chapters that didn't play out the way you planned, and what did you do? You figured it out. You salvaged. You adjusted. You found another plan. The muscle you've built over years or perhaps even decades isn't going to disappear now. If anything, it's just stronger. So here's the objection I hear most often. But Julie, what if I can't get back to where I was? What if the market shifts? What if I'm older and less relevant? Look, those are real fears, and they deserve to be spoken out loud. But here's what evidence shows. Professionals with deep experience almost always find ways to re-engage. It's usually through your network. Sometimes it's through an advisory role, interim work, or consulting. Sometimes it's re-entering in a different sector. The shape of the role may change, but the ability to contribute, that doesn't vanish. Now, I know that can feel like cold comfort when you're staring down what feels like a one-way move, but pause and think. How many people have you watched reinvent themselves? They didn't go back to exactly what they had before, perhaps, but they built something new with the same raw material of their expertise, their credibility, their education, and their relationships. Agency may look different than it did earlier in your career, but it doesn't disappear. The real trap is believing that this decision is like a final endpoint. It's not. It's directional. You may not be able to reverse the exact step, but you can always redirect. You can recalibrate, and you can reshape the path from wherever you land. That's what agency looks like in this season. Maybe not infinite options, but meaningful options. Enough to move forward, even if you need to continue to adjust along the way. So when you feel paralyzed by the idea that one wrong move could erase everything, remember this. The power you've built across the years doesn't vanish with a single decision. Agency doesn't stop at the leap. It continues from there. Now, before we get finished, let me be clear. I'm not telling you to quit your job tomorrow or make rash emotional moves. That's not how I work, and that's not how I coach. I'm analytical by training, and the way I support people through big choices is rigorous, thoughtful, and step by step. I don't believe in being careless, and I know you don't either. What I'm sharing here is not about abandoning your wisdom. It's about giving you tools to use that wisdom in a way that moves you forward instead of keeping you spinning. Because here's what I know about you. You've already done a lot of the work. You've spoken to your spouse or partner. You've run the numbers. You've had the coffee chats. Maybe you've even interviewed for roles. You've thought about starting a business. You've explored joining a startup. You've considered waiting it out for a promotion. You've looked at pivoting to a new industry. None of that makes you careless. It makes you committed. It shows how seriously you take this. But the reality is, despite all of that effort, you're still circling. Not because you're failing, but because you care so much about getting this right. My goal is to help you channel that same care into clarity and action so you can stop rehearsing and start deciding. Because at some point, the circling needs to end. And when it does, there are a few grounded realities worth keeping front and center. So let's bring this all down to brass tacks. One, there will never be perfect certainty, and no amount of analysis will eliminate all risk. At some point, the decision must be made with the best available information. Two, the bigger the decision, the more you need to redefine what enough looks like. You can't solve for perfect, but you can decide what criteria matter most right now, whether that's impact, stability, freedom, or meaning. And three, even so-called forever decisions can be reshaped. Walking away from a role or a field may feel final, but you still retain influence, expertise, and networks that create future options you can't yet see. Agency doesn't vanish when you make a decision. It evolves. If this is where you are, if you're rocking on the edge of the diving board waiting for perfect, I want to invite you to my free masterclass. It's on demand. It's called Get Unstuck and Move Forward with Confidence. It's designed exactly for professionals like you, wise, rational, responsible, and also ready to stop circling the decision. You'll walk away with tools you can use immediately to stop that rocking, to start moving, and to trust yourself to adjust after making that choice. The link is in the description.